This is a shock collar. If I run too slow, it shocks me, and I'm going to use it to beat my marathon time of 6 hours and 45 minutes, but this did things to me that I wasn't prepared for.
So I've done over 3 kilometers. This is a pretty fast pace. If I can hold this pace, then I'll finish in just over 4 hours.
It started off well. In order to beat my time, I set a pace that I couldn't fall below, which I quickly found was quite fast and hard to keep up with. What I found interesting, though, is what my body went through at different times throughout this run, because you might think it would just slowly get harder as it went on, but that actually wasn't the case. By the time I made it to the 5 kilometer mark, I was actually feeling pretty good, even though I'd already been shocked a couple times.
I need water, I need water!
10 kilometers wasn't too hard either, but I ran into a problem because it was really hot outside, and this is the point I could tell my muscles were starting to give out a bit. By the 15 kilometer mark, I felt a pain in my foot and in my hips.
My Achilles on my left is hurting, and my hip flexor on my right is hurting.
I needed to get to the 42 kilometer mark, so I was barely a third done, and it was at this point that I felt like I might not be able to actually do it. However, of course, every time I would slow down, I would get shocked, so I really had no choice. But by the 20 kilometer mark, I hit a bit of a second wind, so I was feeling good.
My Fitbit is telling me to slow down.
By this point, I was halfway done, but for whatever reason, this was the point where things fell downhill fast.
Yeah, people are genuinely gonna start using this to train. This is like actually working. I feel terrible, but if I stop, it's very bad.
My body just started hurting 100 times more to nowhere, and it seemed to be all I could concentrate on. And this was around the time I started to actually see the benefits of the shock collar, because this got really frustrating. As I kept running further, because my muscles were so sore, I started to get slower and slower, and was running right on the line between too slow, which meant I started to get shocked a lot.
Barely reacts anymore.
At first, I thought this was a good thing because I believed it would help me push more, which it kinda did, but two things happened that I didn't account for. The first is that it really started to hurt my head. I was curious to see if it was leaving marks on my neck because it was so hard. I was getting terrible headaches. I definitely would not recommend using this on your dog. However, the second thing I noticed is as the time went on, it got to the point where my body was in so much pain everywhere that the shock collar stopped phasing me.
Bro, you barely react, so I like held it for like a while.
You could see I wasn't reacting to it, so the power got turned up. And this is where the problem started, because I was depleted but forced to keep going. By this point, I was on track to beat my record by 50%, but I felt terrible, like I was being tortured with no way out, and my only option was to keep running. And 30 kilometers in is where everything happened. I was basically walking and just taking the shots. I felt like crying. My body was so overstimulated, I couldn't think, and it was like I didn't even know where I was, and I just kept getting shocked. And then something in me just snapped. I got one particular shock that was just so infuriating that I just decided at that point I wasn't gonna get shocked for the rest of the marathon. And somehow I started running again, and I just didn't stop. I kept the pace. I felt like crying. I was crying. My body was in so much pain. Somehow it forced me to find the energy I didn't even know I had, and I kept going without slowing down for this last 10 kilometers and finished 42.2 kilometers with a time of 4 hours and 37 minutes. But when I finished, you can literally see a mark on my neck. I shaved over 2 hours off of my marathon time with no training. So do you think it was worth it?